Want to get caught up on the latest, greatest bioprocessing equipment and solutions without putting in travel requests, flying across the country, spending gobs of money and time getting harassed by salespeople? Of course you do. Register for Bioprocess Online's BioExpo Live, being held July 30th through August 1st. This inaugural expo is a fantastic opportunity for biopharma companies and contract manufacturers to evaluate the latest and greatest from the comfort of your desktop or mobile device. Conveniently, we've broken down the lineup into upstream solutions on July 30th, downstream solutions July 31st, and quality analytical and data solutions on August 1st. It's absolutely free to register for this series of short, digestible, and interactive sessions. Just hit the link in today's show notes to register for BioExpo Live today. Not too long ago, on episode 197 of this very podcast, I had a conversation with ImmunityBio Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Bobby Reddy, about the company's then impending first approval, an immunotherapy called Anktiva that has since gained FDA approval in non-muscle invasive bladder cancer, and one that offers many improvements over the current standard of care. Beyond Dr. Reddy's role in Anktiva's successful rollout, it was a meaningful conversation for me personally, given the role I've been playing in my dad's care for that very indication. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and on today's show, we're digging even deeper into that success and the people behind it with Dr. Enrique Diloné, who's served as Chief Technology Officer at ImmunityBio since 2023. On this episode, we'll follow and learn from Dr. Diloné's transition from the research lab to the business side of biotech, how he did it, how his experiences put him in position to join Immunity at a pivotal moment, the roles he's been playing in the company's next post-commercial chapter with Anktiva, and the broad spectrum of follow-up programs the company is pursuing in lung, colorectal, and ovarian cancers, acute myeloid leukemia, glioblastoma, solid tumors, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and HIV. Enrique, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Matt.
That is an aggressive list of programs that I just rattled off. You have got your hands full.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
I want to
It's all in a day's work. It's all in a day's work.
All in a day's work. Yeah. We're going to get into that. I've got questions for you on that very aggressive pipeline that you guys are forming up. But I want to start by rewinding the clock a little bit. And, you and I had the benefit of a conversation not too long ago, and it made me recall the story. My son just returned from his first year, his freshman year at Penn State University, and when he got home, we were having a conversation about his academic experiences, and he said, "You know what?" He said, "Organic chemistry is the leading cause of depression in State College, Pennsylvania," which is where Penn State University is. He got through it, but he said it was like a class like no other in terms of its impact. More often than not negative on his peers. You, on the other hand, told me that you ran circles around your peers in organic chemistry, and that the experience there was one of many that influenced the rest of your academic and industry experiences. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, tell us about that academic influence on your path to biopharma.
Well, Matt, let me thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think I must have been 19 years old when I took that class.
Yeah.
And at the time that I took the class, I was still thinking I was going to be a pre-med student and ultimately a physician, not thinking that chemistry would interest me all that much. But when I started organic chemistry, I very quickly switched to a chemistry major, which was not the case with most of the pre-med students. Mm. And I just enjoyed being in the lab. It took me back a little bit. It sort of finding your calling in a way, which is a little bit nerdy, but but I just enjoy the laboratory. I couldn't get enough of it. The textbook piece and understanding and reading, the pre-med guys had a pretty solid grasp of that, just regurgitating a lot of the information.
Yeah.
But actually going in the laboratory and doing chemistry, that's what I enjoyed. And many times my experiments I don't remember any one of my experiments failing when I was in the laboratory. So, and some of them were pretty intense, oxidations and the Grignard reaction. If you get a little bit of water in there, the Grignard reaction doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, it was interesting. And so I went back to my father and I told him, I want to be a chemist. And of course, there was the ensued discussion.
Yeah, well, just for the audience's benefit, your father was a physician, wasn't he?
That's right. My father was a physician. He was a pediatrician,
and he wanted that apple to fall close to the tree.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. But then once we had that discussion, he talked to some of his peers, and he recognized, chemistry is a good profession. And as it turns out, he influenced me still further, because then he told me, why don't you at least work making medicines? And that's how I actually wound up in pharma. He convinced me of that.
Yeah.
And so that was how that happened.
Was that convincing, that inspiration to move into Florida, and the influence of your dad before or after you earned your PhD? I know you got your PhD in chemistry from Seton Hall, but did you pursue that PhD with the intention to move into medicine making, or did that?
Yeah. I knew. So at this point, when I was having that conversation with my father, I was still working on my bachelor's at NYU, but once I graduated from NYU, I knew I wanted to pursue additional degrees. And somebody recommended Seton Hall University. And I needed at the time, a small university, my environment. From having been in the city for as long as I was. And so once I went to Seton Hall University, I did my master's, but then I had to work for a little bit. Somebody had suggested to me that I pursue my PhD. And again, once I went to Roche at Hoffman-La Roche, I started in the generics industry when I graduated with my master's, but very quickly moved to Hoffman-La Roche. At the time, their number one product was ceftriaxone, or Rocephin. It was a cephalosporin. And I've been working on cephalosporins for about a year. So I got into the company, and the company ultimately helped me with my PhD.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's outstanding. And then those early years, I mean, you mentioned that you like the lab. You like the lab. You self-identified as a little bit nerdy, which
yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Yeah. So why not stay there? I mean, you moved into a business capacity in bio. After spending those years at Hoffman-La Roche and Wyeth in the science and research capacities, what inspired you to take a look at the business side?
So I wanted a greater say on how products got developed. I felt when I was at Roche, I remember I got to a point where I felt I can contribute more. I know I can. That was a very strong urge that I really felt after I had been at Roche for 9.5 years, and I really felt I got to contribute more. After I got my PhD, I left Roche and went to Wyeth, and they put me on a global team. And I mean, immediately I was able to contribute to global drug development. So it was just a question of just understanding. For lack of a better word, Matt, you just knew you could contribute further to the business, to just the aspects of developing the whatever the asset was. As you got exposure, because at Roche, I was in quality control, I was in pharmaceutical development, and I was in drug metabolism, servicing the discovery groups. So I understood pretty broadly the whole preclinical aspects of drug development until commercialization in QC. The technical aspects of it, not the biology, the technical aspects of drug development.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I moved up the ranks, it just became clear to me I wanted more. And when I went to Wyeth, they put me on a global, they then taught me global drug development. They exposed me to colleagues around the globe. I began to understand other geographies and how to get drugs approved, basically, how to work collectively in a multidisciplinary team to get drugs approved. And not just from the technical aspects of it, but also everything to do with that, right? How do you relate with your team members? How do you work with the process? There was a maturity emerging, and then very quickly somebody plucked me out of big pharma.
Plucked you out of big pharma. I wanna hover just for another minute or two on the period where you began to feel as though you had more to contribute. And here's why. I've made mention of this on the podcast recently on a few occasions. There's I don't know if you're a Redditor, if you ever go on Reddit, but there's a subreddit called Biotech. It's a biotech subreddit. And I'd say the bulk, if not, a good portion of the conversation on that, the user generated conversation, is around aspirational. It's lab employees and research scientists who have aspirations to move into the business side, and they're asking questions about it. How do I do it? What path do I take? What do I need to learn? Who do I need to talk to? And I wonder, retrospectively, now that you've got the benefit of wisdom behind you, when you first began to feel as though you had more to offer, had you been given the opportunity to offer more at that point, do you think you would have been ready? Or do you think there were key experiences between that sort of emotion and I guess aspiration and the actual exposure you had or opportunity you had that were key to being successful in a role that required, I guess, more directorial skill and more vision?
That's an interesting question. I think that there's no question that you have. I mean, a key learner inevitably is failure. It's just a key teacher. That you go through different kinds of failures, be that a product failure or a bankruptcy in a small biotech or whatever it is, that you just can't read about something like that. You have to be exposed to that sort of thing. But even in the large companies, many times we had worked on products for many years. And then it got to a point where, for whatever reason, some of them were clinical or tox, or there was a technical challenge. You were told you're not working on this product anymore.
Yeah.
And you asked me, was I ready? It's difficult for me to say, to be honest, Matt. It's difficult for me to say definitively that I was ready for this or that. I think there is an aggressiveness when you're young that sort of needs to be tempered, so that eagerness and aggressiveness is directed positively when you're working, especially when you're working with other people. And everybody that I think a lot of people that have talent at some point think they're the smartest person in the room. And then you come to terms and you realize that, even for all your academic credentials and everything else, the center of the knowledge of the universe doesn't revolve around you.
Yeah.
So, but I think at the time I would have been ready if something had been offered to me that was appropriate.
Yeah.
And it was just the case that just didn't happen. I think many times, Matt, when you're coming into an organization at a certain level, it's difficult for people to view you differently even as you grow.
Yeah.
They still see you. It's like your parents, right? Your parents always see you as their kid. You could be president, but you're still my kid. And so it's just the same thing when you go in at a certain level in an organization and you move up the ranks. There are people that are never going to be able to make that transition as you make the transition in maturity and in role. And so it takes effort for people to make those transitions. And so usually, I remember speaking at the time with several of my colleagues, they told me, if you want to move up the ranks, now that you've gotten your PhD, you have to go to another organization that views you as a PhD level scientist and doesn't view you as the entry level person that you came in as.
Yeah.
And it's nothing, it's just, so that was the first really hit to my ego that in industry that forced me to grow up, it's just a matter of reality.
Yeah. Did that experience coincide, or was that corollary with? I wanted to get back to the comment you made about being plucked out of big bio. Were those?
No, so that was 2 years later. That was when I went to Wyeth. I went in as not an entry level, but a couple of levels above entry level as a PhD scientist. They treated me really well, and then I was there for about a year and a half, doing well, almost about to get promoted. And then that's when a colleague from Roche called me, probably one of the most influential people in my career, Steven Sapinski. And he called me, and he was the one that plucked me out of large pharma and gave me a tremendous opportunity. To this day, I'm thankful to Steve for that.
Yeah. And what move was that?
That was when I went to Eyetech. I went to a small New York firm focused on acute macular degeneration. It was ophthalmology, and they were developing this very interesting drug. It was an oligonucleotide, a pegylated oligonucleotide that was to be dosed directly into the eye for macular degeneration. We ultimately got that drug approved. That was a great experience, I think. That was I worked there for about 3 years under the Eyetech brand, and then OSI bought them. And I worked for an additional, I want to say total of 5 years together between the two entities. So that was a great experience and gave me a lot of exposure.
What was the role that you took there?
So originally I was director of analytical development and quality control. So the bulk of my career up until 2010 was primarily focused on analytical chemistry in some capacity. Just developing the assays and the methods, working side by side with the process sciences folks to get the drug ready for the marketing application.
Yeah. Was it at Eyetech? So you help me out with the chronology here. You shared with me an anecdote the last time we spoke about about achieving clarity around your lack of business acumen in a specific setting that inspired you to further educate in terms of the business side. Was that at Eyetech?
No, that was at Amicus. At Amicus Therapeutics.
Okay. Yeah.
I was at Amicus Therapeutics. I was. This is around 2012. I've come into Amicus. Now I have technical operations. At the time, it was very small, but it was growing. It was a growing area in the company. And I got promoted to vice president, I was elated. I finally made it to the executive ranks. I was head of a function. And then I remember being in some of the meetings with the rest of the senior Amicus leadership. And they're just talking all these terms that I'm unfamiliar with. And a lot of it is just business jargon, how to raise money, talking about, NPIs and NPVs, discount cash flows, all these. How do you value that deal? How do you value this deal? How do we envision, what's the bottom line on this, the COGS. I hadn't worried about COGS until then. All this is, I'm worried about developing drugs, and so, that's when I finally it came to mind that I have to go to business school. I have to do some formal business training. And I remember the seminal moment came when I was at a PDA FDA meeting in an elevator with this a very competent person. She was on the board of directors of PDA, Ursula Busey.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew she had a PhD and an MBA. And I asked her, what made you go for the MBA? And she said, they were talking over me. And I said, oh, so I completely related to that experience. And that's when I decided I had to go for a business degree, which I ultimately did. So that was and that was, man, that was a fish out of water. You really realize that, when you go, I'm sure there's a lot of people that can relate to this, but you're going to school thinking, again, now after 20 odd plus years in the business, you go into school and just all these different opinions and different points of view and different perspectives, having been in science for as long as I had been by that point. Again, it was another forced moment to mature and,
Yeah.
and realize, you sort of, by this point, you're not as shocked because you sort of realize, okay, that this progression consistently humbles you. That's just my opinion, but consistently as you move up the ranks and you realize the complexity of the problems that folks work at the next level, you just constantly, you realize how little you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then you expand again to fit that level, and then you move up again and so on.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, and that didn't necessarily come real easy to you, given that you had been studying in a discipline where scientific principles are scientific principles, and then you
exactly.
get into the business side, and there, A plus B could be A1 plus B7 equals C. Like there are just so many permutations and variables. Did you struggle with that a little bit?
Of course, and there were just like little snippets. The professor, I went up to the professor because the professor was he had an engineering degree and a doctorate in business administration,
Mm-hmm.
but an undergraduate degree in engineering. And I asked him, you're an engineer. How did you adjust to this? And he said to me, Enrique, the key thing to know is that in business, 80% is good enough. 80% is good enough. Think about that in everything you do in science. If you think 80% of overpasses are safe, is that acceptable? And so
Yeah.
this is where it's just and so the ambiguity of business, I think, personally, always challenges technical and scientific professionals.
Yeah.
And when even physicians, some of the physicians in the field that I knew that went and got their business background, whatever that happened to be, an executive education or an MBA, even they told me it is very difficult to make that transition. It is. And so, and in some ways, Matt, you need that. You need that to succeed as an executive in pharma, because it's just a different way of approaching things and a different way of speaking to those business professionals when you're not speaking science or technical things. I think it makes you more effective.
Yeah. I mean, longtime listeners of the podcast know that I can go long on this topic to the transition from, and people might get tired of hearing it, but I never get tired of hearing it because every story has its own flavor. Every story has its own perspectives and angles. But I don't want to dwell here too long. I do have one more question for you on this topic though, and it's sort of a philosophical one. I'm just interested in your take on. You mentioned that you love the lab. And when you began to entertain the concept of going into the business side, your your expertise was in making medicine, developing medicine, you know. When you make the transition into the business side and you have to gain expertise on running a business, keeping it profitable, maintaining, you know, maintaining the livelihood of your employees, running a department, organizational skills, as in the organization. Is it a dangerous place? Can it be a dangerous place to potentially lose sight of the passion around developing therapeutics? And how do you maintain? So two-part question. Is there ever a danger that, like, hey, now I'm a businessman and it's less about the therapeutic development, and how do you avoid it? Like, what steps do you take, you personally? What does Enrique Diloné do when he wakes up in the morning to say, like, you know, it might not just be about the bottom line today. Like, we need to, you know, maintain our focus on the therapeutic. Does the question make sense? I mean,
it totally does. It totally does. So I still remain close to the science. That's how I do it. That's the short answer. For me, even today on my role in ImmunityBio, I am constantly talking science with folks. And so, but the difference is, and again, this was conversations we had when I was in business school. You need to be able to pivot. You need to be able to, at one point, you're talking in-depth characterization of a structural impurity for 1 hour with folks that are all scientists. And then in the next hour, you're talking with the commercial operations team on supply chain and order to cash and all these other things. And you have to be able to compartmentalize the transitions, but it doesn't mean that you've lost touch with the aspects that brought you to ultimately developing medicines for patients. You know, and you can, and I would encourage this, I certainly did it, proactively understand the business beyond the function that you conduct, so that you read about what the company is doing, you understand the field of oncology, not like a physician, but to the extent that you can. So you remain grounded in what you're doing and why you are doing it. While at the same time, when you need to conduct business, you go and conduct business. And so I was able to do this, Matt, I personally think, for two reasons: education, but there's also mentorship. There were people who took me under their wing and showed me how this is done. Exposed me, for example, to a senior leadership team conversation where it just went all over the place. And so you just absorb all this information. And you don't realize at the time you are absorbing it. But if you're intent, if you're present, you absorb it. And when you move to the next position, you remember all this. It all of a sudden comes out. Yeah. And so that there's that, but you have to have which I firmly believe this has helped me quite a bit. You have to have a mindset of continuous learning. You have to constantly be open to just different things and be exposed and be a little bit unnerved sometimes, you know, about where the path you're on.